Yeah, I'm going to do it. So if I get fired, I get fired. I mean, what am I going to do? I'm ready to retire anyway. Well, periods of unhappiness affect everyone from time to time. Prolonged chronic depression occurs most often in people over 40. And this is oh, wait a minute, it's an answer to a question on your test. Women 2 to 3 times more frequently than men. So it happens to old farts, people over 40, I'm sorry. Well, I shouldn't call them old farts. And women who are old, or women who are more likely to have depression than men. Depression is not sadness, but is characterized by unhappy moods, loss of interests, energy and appetite, difficulty in concentration, restless agitation. Okay, that's depression. Depression may not be triggered by any apparent stress. Without treatment, it may last for months, so you have to be careful about that. You need to treat it. Depression may afflict 13 to 20% of the population at any one time, which is an awful lot of people. Bipolar disorder is diagnosed when someone who suffers from depression also displays episodes of excessively expansive moods, which includes sustained overactivity, talkativeness, increased energy, and strange grandiosity. And let me see if I can get to these because if you've ever been around somebody who was on crystal meth or on speed, they act manic is what they act. And actually that's what it's supposed to do. Okay. So let's see if this thing works. I was right, Marius had that thing in his office. Had it locked up in his office.
Just like cookies.
Yeah, he's funny. He's such a funny guy. He's so weird. Anyway, okay, well, it doesn't look like that one's going to work, so let's go to the next one. Oh, no. Come on. Oh, okay. Let's do this. There we go. Let's do this. Okay. Okay. Wait.
How was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. Yeah.
Oh.
I saw the Macy parade
There you go.
at the Broadways
Oh.
with Hawkeye and
Jack.
Jack. I forgot the cat's name, so I call it Miss Jinxie.
She's a monster. I don't think I probably told you what her name was. Her name's Stalker because she stalked other cats. She's mean. She attacks them. But she's a female, so she doesn't kill anything. Well, she kills mice and stuff. But she attacks her own kittens. I mean, she's just a horrible monster.
Cat took some picture of all three of them. The cat was laying right on your chair like this, and she was just like this all relaxed.
Yeah,
and
like
the dogs are all like just relaxing. They're all just looking.
that's my animals. Jeez, how can I get out of this?
How was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. It was good. I went down in Valley. It was warm. I'm getting over my cold, super cold. Well, I think it was a bad sinus.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I was all clogged up on this side. Couldn't hear.
Right. So where did you go?
Down in Valley in Phoenix.
Oh, Phoenix. Okay.
Yeah, it was warm.
I was there. I didn't see you.
I didn't see you either.
I flew out of, where did I fly out of?
Oh, you flew
Phoenix.
out of Phoenix?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It was pretty nice. Out there was warm.
Yeah, like in the 80s.
Yeah.
Not bad. How frustrating.
Phoenix is already complaining about the migrants that were crossing over the border.
Why?
I guess that's.
Did they all go to Phoenix?
Some of them showed up there,
Okay.
and I guess they're some of the people that want to help. They're asking for donations for hygiene and blankets, the stuff that they could use.
Sure.
They could use. And man, those comments were ruthless or brutal.
Wow.
I was just like, oh man, I couldn't even find one nice comment on there.
Oh, wow.
forgot, I think it was one of the news posts.
Mhm.
What does it say? Reset, cancel, sicknesses. I don't care. All right, let's go back. All right. Let's get stuck on that one. Depression, come on. There we go. All right, well, we won't show those films. Depression may lead to suicide. Whoops. Estimates are that 80% of the people who commit suicide are profoundly depressed, and this is one of the reasons why they commit suicide. A lot of times they seem like they're coming out of their depression, and of course that's when they commit suicide, because while they're in the deepest of depression, they certainly can't lift a gun and pull the trigger. It just doesn't happen. But when they're coming out, and when they look back and say, oh my God, that was the most painful thing that ever happened to me, all that depression that I had, I think I'll go ahead and not do that again. I'll off myself. While suicide rates overall are decreasing in the Western Hemisphere, disturbing indications are that the suicide in the younger population is increasing. This is, of course, something that I was dealing with up in Montana. Increased use of drugs among youth may be causing the suicides. Crystal meth seems to be one of the culprits. Heroin and opioids, another culprit. But we can't. Usually, when people are stoned, when they're smoking pot, they're not suicidal. It's afterwards. I don't know if you've ever been around somebody that smokes a lot of pot, but one of the things that happens with them is while they are smoking pot, they act one way. And when they are not smoking pot, they are the very opposite of that person. Mm-hmm. When they're smoking pot, everything is interesting. When they're not smoking pot, nothing is interesting. So it's usually when they're not smoking pot, and they're agitated. Remember, there's some mellow dude when they're smoking pot, but when they're not, they're just jittery. So we're dealing with a drug that has negative aspects to it, and the negative aspects are mostly when they're not stoned. And here we're talking about legalizing this for everybody in the United States, which should be interesting to see all the stupid people wandering around who can't remember anything.
They're walking around like this kid.
Zombie apocalypse.
Yep.
What was that movie that you
Idiocracy?
yeah.
One of the great movies of all time. Looking at concordant studies, the incidence of depression is much higher among dizygotic as monozygotic twins. Concordant studies of monozygotic twins raised apart shows equally similar results. These studies point to a strong heritability of depression, and of course, like I said before, you've probably seen families that seem kind of grouchy. Not just grouchy, that's not really the right word.
Irritated.
Yeah, just literally, everybody in the family seems depressed, from the littlest kid to the mom and dad.
Yeah.
The reality is that mom and dad are, men who are depressed marry women who are depressed, and vice versa. They're looking for somebody who understands them. And so we see this a lot. Bipolars marry bipolars, schizophrenics, it's not absolutely certain. People with a little strange proclivity, OCD people, tend to marry other OCD people, and then they argue for the rest of their married career, married lives, about what is something that they're supposed to do and something that they're not supposed to do. Like, how many times do you flip the switch before it's turned on? Okay. One may say 7, the other may say 11. And this is very serious as far as they're concerned.
And then it just becomes a pattern and gets into the kids.
Yeah, it does, and they condition their children to be obsessive compulsive, which may not be the same thing. When the kids move away, or when the kids get away from them, then they will lose that OCD, because it's not real as far as they're concerned. They just do it to placate their parents. Depression is common in select medical conditions, especially those that involve endocrine system and brain disorders. Cushing Syndrome is caused by lesions on the pituitary gland that cause an excess amount of ACTH, And of course, because of the excess amount of ACTH, it also creates excess amounts of cortisol. Cortisol, of course, is a stress hormone, and it causes all kinds of horrible problems. Individuals with Cushing Syndrome tend to suffer from heart disease because cortisol is relatively toxic and it makes grooves in people's blood vessels. And then, of course, there's accumulation of cholesterol, and the cholesterol accumulates until it blocks the blood vessel. But it has to do with the grooves kept by the cortisol. The first symptom is depression, followed by obesity. We're talking about Cushing disease, so they get depressed. Then the next thing we see is obesity. And strangely enough, we normally don't diagnose these people with Cushing's disease until we start seeing the amazing hirsuteness. They have this strange body hair growth, long hairs. And of course, if they have black hair, then it looks almost like they're werewolves, of course. And of course, if it's a woman that has it, it's fairly obvious. That's where we get the mustache and the beard and whatnot. Hair grows out of their ears, which is happening to me, except I don't have Cushing's disease. I'm just an old man. Parkinson's disease, about 50% of the people suffering from Parkinson's disease suffer from depression that can be attributed to no other symptom. That's the only explanation we have for it. This may be due to lowered levels of serotonin from loss of neurons in the dorsal raphe nucleus, where large amounts of serotonin are stored. And so that's Parkinson's disease. Are we done talking about Parkinson's disease? Parkinson's disease is really kind of interesting. A lot of times it's caused by a trauma to the brain. Some TBI can cause it, traumatic brain injury. But also a shock to the system, like taking some fairly strong drugs, can cause Parkinson's disease. And that's what happened to Michael J. Fox. He snorted too much cocaine. He's kind of an interesting guy because he's Canadian. Canadians drink a lot, and the reason they drink a lot is because they didn't go, that didn't sound right. They didn't go through prohibition like we did in the United States. So from 1919 until 1932, the sale and consumption of alcohol in the United States was limited. It wasn't completely blocked, but it was limited. Well, they didn't do the same thing up in Canada. One of the problems we had in the United States is that people were drinking hard liquor. Everybody was drinking hard liquor. They weren't drinking beer, they weren't drinking wine. They were drinking a lot of hard liquor. So we had people that were drinking, you've seen the movies and cowboy movies where they go into the bar and they pour them a glass of whiskey. Well, I don't know if you've ever been thirsty or not, but whiskey's not the one thing that you want to drink when you're thirsty. It's pretty toxic. But here they are, they just came in off the trail and they're dusty and they've got, their mouth is full of dirt. So what do they drink? They drink whiskey, of course. Yeah, and it's like a double shot of whiskey. It's in one of those strange glasses. Of course, it's not real, but this is something that was happening all over the United States. So if you read a mixer, a book talking about mixing different drinks, the drinks they drank before Prohibition were just really, really strong. I mean, there was like everything was a Long Island iced tea or something. If you guys have any idea what that is, hopefully you don't. But it's like you just mix everything that you can find together, and that's the vodka and vermouth, and which is a martini, I guess. My son was a bartender, so he knows all this stuff. And I'm a teetotaler, so I have no clue. I'm talking about it, but I have no clue. Anyway, so he's Canadian. So he grew up drinking beer, probably, but the beer up in Canada is twice as strong as it is in the United States. It has a lot more alcohol in it. The alcohol in the United States is mostly 3.2%, 3.2 beer, what they call 3.2 beer. But in Canada, it's much stronger than that, more like 7%. So, you know, yeah. So if you go up, it's more like the malt liquors in the United States. But he grew up drinking that stuff, and when he came down to Hollywood, of course, he moved into harder stuff, and then because he was a star, he started snorting cocaine, and he had a proclivity for Parkinson's disease anyway. It kicked him into Parkinson's disease in his 30s, which is something that you very rarely see. Usually Parkinson's disease is a disease you see in the late 50s, early 60s, 70s maybe. You know, I may have Parkinson's disease in my future, you never know. I've always been afraid of multiple sclerosis. Not because it's in my family, but because it seems like such a horrible thing for somebody who was a runner and holds all these records, and all of a sudden I can't walk. You know, that seems horrible to me. Anyway, so Parkinson's disease, Michael J. Fox probably shocked into his brain with the cocaine. Risperidone is a drug that increases monoamine oxidase and thus depletes serotonin and norepinephrine, and it causes profound depression. So you wonder, why in the world would anybody take Risperidone? Well, it's an antipsychotic. Some researchers have looked at these effects and point to increases in monoamine oxidase as the cause of depression. Electroconvulsive therapy also reduces depression by reducing biogenic amines, which of course is the monoamine oxidase that we're talking about. So one of the ways to combat depression is to give somebody a monoamine oxidase inhibitor. But unfortunately, the monoamine oxidase inhibitors that we have are fairly toxic themselves. You can't eat olives if you can't drink wine, or you have a really negative reaction that may potentially kill you. So once upon a time, we used to give people monoamine oxidase inhibitors to take care of their depression, but of course we don't do that. We don't do that nearly as much anymore as we did in the past. It's just too dangerous. Too many foods out there that might potentially kick this person into seizures. All around the world, more women than men suffer from depression at a rate at or near 2 to 1. Several interesting studies show that rates may actually be closer to the same for men and women. A study of depression rates among the Amish shows men and women with similar rates. We use these isolated groups like the Amish and the Hutterites and the Mennonites, these different religious groups, because they're isolated. I mean, they're individualistic, and we can look at these people and we can see a compendium of men and women. What is the intervening variable as far as Amish are concerned? Amish men do not drink alcohol. Men are more likely to self-medicate with alcohol than women, but Amish do not drink alcohol. Hutterites do, but the Amish don't. Amish are Anabaptists. Anabaptist, and what that means is, once upon a time there was only one church, okay, the Catholic Church, and actually it split into two churches, the Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. But in Europe it was the Catholic Church, and then then there were select individuals that felt that the Catholic Church was too oppressive, that they weren't following God's precepts, and then we started the Protestant movement started. One of the first Protestant movements that started were the Anabaptists. The Catholics claimed that you need to be baptized as soon as you're born. Okay, so you have to be baptized. The Anabaptists didn't believe in that. The Anabaptists believe their beliefs and their what they do in their rituals, their religious rituals, are very, very similar to the Catholic Church. However, they don't believe that you can be baptized. They believe that you have to accept God at some point, and a tiny baby like that cannot accept God. So these individuals, in an Anabaptist church, you can't become an adult or you can't accept Christ until you are at least 18 years old. Okay. So you have to be an adult. And that's what the Anabaptists are. And there's a bunch of them. There's the Hutterites, like I said before, the Mennonites. There's a group called the Moravians, the Amish. Everybody knows about the Amish. You see them on television from time to time. Anyway, so these are all Anabaptists. Why is that important? Well, it's not really important, except they tend to isolate themselves from everybody else. They were persecuted in Europe, so when they came to the United States, they decided that they would just build communities of their own and try to stay away from general society, because general society didn't understand them. So that's the way they were. Not only that, the other thing that we know about the Amish and the Hutterites and the Mennonites is they marry within their own group. Now you guys have this whole intricate clan system, but the Hutterites, there's only 11 male, they started out with 11 males. And those 11 men married 11 women, and then when they made babies, they married somebody from one of the other families. But we only have an 11 family genetic structure going. I know. Women can't come in from outside. As weird as that is. And men can't come in from outside. So we have this isolated community of 11 genetic structures. It's fascinating. That's the Hutterites. The Amish are kind of the same way.
I think there's like several. Through one of the programs I'm watching through Netflix, there's some on the Utah area, the Fundamentals.
Oh, okay.
Between I think the border of Utah, they live right in rocks. It's weird, like right into those big old rocks that you see.
The polygamists? Are these the polygamists you're
I
talking
believe they. I think that's how some society calls them, but they have a different name for them.
about? Sure, of course.
So it's just like even a big old hill of rock that you see, and you'll just see them. Their houses are right inside the.
So they have underground homes. Well, that's interesting.
Last night I was watching it, and I was like, and then they were talking about how communities like they bring in probably a member from outside that's probably from another polygamous village, or
Yeah.
I think Hurricane has one in Utah, Hurricane Utah. And my sister's been out that way, and they say they come in usually from outside into town. My cousin was married to one of them. I don't know how that happened. But, they don't release the kids to her, so he used to go out there to visit and come back.
This is too weird. There's a story. I'm not going to go into this story. I'm sorry. If you talk to Andrea Brown about the Hutterites, she'll tell you that their women are always trying to get pregnant by Indian guys, because just to dilute the blood a little bit. Yeah. I don't know. I've never seen a Hutterite that look even remotely native. I think she's probably pulling my leg, but they're really kind of funny too, because they'll go into a store and they'll shoplift, and it's acceptable behavior to take what you need. Mm-hmm. You know, God will forgive you for taking what you need. So they'll go into Walmart, put on 3 pairs of clothes, and they'll go walking out. I know, it's terrible.
And that's the Hutterites?
It's like Hutterites, yeah. Well, yeah, stories. Yeah, the women are all seducing all the native men, and then the guys are all going in and stealing all the stuff from Walmart. They make their own clothes, so, okay. Kind of interesting. Okay, sleep studies, depressed patients shows that people suffering from depression spend much more time in stages 1 and 2 and much less time in the more restful stages of 3 and 4. And of course, this is a really serious problem with people suffering from PTSD. During stage 1 and 2, of course, they're having dreams about, recurring dreams about whatever trauma they've been through. This is when they dream about combat and whatnot. And this is the reason why it's difficult, why men that have insomnia have a difficult time falling asleep. Because when they do fall asleep, of course, they have bad dreams. And they can remember these dreams because it's in stage 1 and 2. This is one of the reasons why so many people suffering from PTSD were drug users and alcoholics. This is something we saw after Vietnam. This means that depressed people jump into REM episodes much earlier than people with normal sleep patterns. REM sleep seems more intense for the depressed, and of course that's when they also have dreams during their REM stages. Studies show that the shorter the time it takes to go into REM, the more severe the depression. One of the effects of antidepressant monoamine oxidase inhibitors is the fact that it reduces REM sleep, and therefore it reduces the depression. Research by Anaveros and his colleagues found that 40% of the people that they tested had abnormalities in their temporal lobes. These were people with panic attacks. Even in the resting state of these individuals, they have increased activity in the hippocampal area, an area known to induce fear when stimulated. So this is the hippocampus. Hippocampus, of course, has to do with memory. So these people have recurring memories. They think too much. And of course, they are thinking about whatever negative thing that they're thinking about, and it just keeps repeating on them. They can't get rid of it, and that causes their panic attack. Either of you guys ever had a panic attack?
I think I did. Yeah.
What triggered it? If you don't mind, you don't have to tell me, of course.
Well, I'm comfortable.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so when I get into a place where a dark area, then I start to panic.
So airplanes are not your favorite thing.
No.
Have you ever ridden on an airplane?
Yes.
Was it
Mhm.
pretty bad?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
I started I don't know, maybe it was just, I was afraid maybe because I started to sweat.
Sure.
And I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on? And then to make it worse, I was sitting in the middle
Right.
between two people. And then they closed
They put you in the middle?
they put me in the middle. And then they closed the window and then I was like, oh, so.
I think you'd have been better off on the aisle.
Yeah. And then.
Because you got all that free room over here, or over here, whichever. I
Mhm.
don't know. So.
Yes. So I started to sweat, I'm sweating and
Sure.
my heart started pounding,
And you couldn't think of anything else except the fact
Yes.
that you were in a tight space.
Yes.
And it just got
And it
worse and worse and
magnified,
worse. The
yes.
more you thought about it, the smaller the space seemed to you.
Yeah. And then I was just like, oh, and then I'm like, do I tell him I'm gonna get off?
Even though we're at 70,000
Yes.
feet? Right.
Yeah.
So now you understand what was going on. Your hippocampus wouldn't let go of this thing, and you kept having memories of claustrophobic reminders, and it wouldn't go away. And the idea that you're constricted just got worse and worse and worse and worse, because the temporal area, this area that does all the remembering, just wouldn't let it go.
Yeah.
You
And
couldn't
I
think of
it-
something else.
Yeah, and then I started to sweat as well, just like, just that intensity.
That's the way it works. The most common treatment of anxiety is the pharmaceutical benzodiazepine, such as diazepam, Valium. Benzodiazepine Benzodiazepines work because they change the permeability of neural membranes to the chloride ions, especially those that react to GABA. So what we need to do is increase your GABA level. So if we can increase your GABA level, your panic will go away. And you stop thinking about all those things that you're not supposed to be thinking of. The influx of chloride ions inhibits the firing of neurons, and of course, if it inhibits the firing of neurons, then you don't have the recurring thoughts. Studies of individuals suffering from PTSD have shown that on the average, their right hippocampus are 8% smaller than people without PTSD. High levels of circulating glucocorticoids from the chronic and intense stress of the PTSD may have caused the cell loss in the hippocampus, and that is why their hippocampus is so small. Okay, so you're suffering from PTSD. And your hippocampus is smaller than it's supposed to be, so now you have a hard time remembering things. But what you do remember is all of the traumatic events that we're talking that have caused the PTSD to begin with.
I have an older brother. I went to the Desert Storm, the beginning of the Desert Storm. When he comes to visit, he's not drunk. People say he's drunk and they can't leave him alone, but he's not. I can tell when somebody's drinking. He has that shaky, that kind of like how this stone face, and
Sure.
he's usually grouchy. He's really grouchy, and he's a mess. Like sometimes he won't shave, or he'll isolate himself. And people kind of like they know his mood. They just kind of walk around on shells.
Sure.
He's a smart guy. He actually did a couple of work for a chapter house for a while. I think they got the best of him. Is that one of the, I think that is one of the signs of PTSD. And it's like, just walking around, like on Thanksgiving I saw him. This is the worst I probably saw of him.
How old is he?
He's about, I'm 45. He's probably about 55, maybe 60. 55 to 60 around there.
I would like to give you a good prognosis, but at this stage, since Desert Storm was, when was Desert Storm? 93? So he's 20 years into this thing, and he's not any better.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, he's worse. So his prognosis isn't very good.
He already went through, like, I think a couple of marriages. Sometime he'll come up and say, "Can you take me over here?" You take him over there, and he goes, "What are we doing here?" He told me to take you. That's see this. Being a little brother, he would tell me, "Go take me over here," and I thought we were gonna get some stuff or whatever he needs at home. And
Right.
And he goes, "What are we doing here?" And I was like, and I didn't know nothing about psychology then.
Sure.
It was just taking him here and there, and that part, people used to always say he was drunk, because he's not drunk. I can tell if he's drunk, and if they leave him alone.
Of course they leave him alone, especially that stone face.
Yeah. So I didn't realize it until this, learning all from psychology, is I recognized it instantly. People were still saying that, and he's not drunk.
He doesn't even act drunk, but
Uh-huh.
he just doesn't want to interact with people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why he's got the stone face. Warrior face is
Yeah.
what they call it up north.
So why do they not want to isolate themselves?
Why do they want to isolate themselves? They've got all these recurring thoughts, and they can't
Let it go.
let it go. Yeah, so, I mean, if he had a conversation with Francis, the conversation would be totally frivolous. I mean, what could you possibly say to him that would be important?
How was your day?
No, that's not important. Yeah, that's the whole point. So he can't, what he wants to talk about is what he's thinking about. And what he's thinking about is what he's experienced. And so he has to isolate himself, because this is all that's going on in his brain, is these thoughts.
Yeah.
So he can't have a conversation about
I think one of the
going to
main-
the store or something, or whether,
And one of his main things that he really, really kind of is up on the top for him, high priority for him, is his mom. He's always taking his mom to hospitals and medicines. I think that's the first conversation anybody has with him. After that, they just leave him alone.
yeah. And I would bet that the thing that he thought about the most when he was in Desert Storm was his mother.
Yeah, he used to write letters to her and my grandma. He did pretty good for the veterans around here. He was actually, when he came back, he was one of the first that opened up for office for the veterans. He did a lot, and from somewhere they couldn't use him anymore. He was losing it.
He just kept going south.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So now he's like, it's hard. It's kind of hard to find him. He's not at one place. He's in several places. So just to catch him is even impossible. He has to show up at your house.
It's the enemy. If people knew where he was, the enemy would know where he was. It's very common for people just after they've had a combat experience, right afterwards, they're still gung-ho, they're still geared up. So as long as they're around other individuals that have been through the same thing, then they're okay. They're normal. They're not having recurring thoughts. They can have conversations with somebody about what they went through. Now the problem is, the longer that you've done this, or the longer you're away from combat, and the more people that you talk to, they have what they refer to as combat cred. My experiences were more horrible than your experiences, and they play these garbage games where they compare their experiences, and and the problem is a lot of people lie, which is it's not that big a deal, but they're trying to one up each other. That's what's going on.
See, this is what happens with my uncle. He went to Vietnam, and then he went to Desert Storm, and there's another one that went to Korea War, and there's one that was he just did service. So when you put them all together, it's like
they're arguing about apples and oranges, because Korea wasn't anything like Vietnam, which wasn't anything like Desert Storm. I mean, we're fighting in 3 different theaters. So it's like people from World War II arguing, well, I was in the jungles of the South Pacific, and the other guy was fighting through the villages of France and Germany. The two don't have anything at all to do with one another. One was fighting Germans, the other were fighting Japanese. One never saw their enemy. Their enemy was right there the entire time. The Germans had snipers, and a lot of snipers, and the Japanese, of course, had bonsai attacks. I mean, you can't compare the two. It's like trying to compare Vietnam with World War II. It's impossible. It just doesn't. You can't do it. My dad was a World War II vet. He was a German, and he was in the European theater. And my brother was a Vietnam vet, and they lived together, and they never could talk about their experiences with each other, despite the fact that, horror is horror, right? But no, because my brother never saw the enemy. The only time they saw the enemy is when they killed them, and then they usually attacked at night. 9:51. That's what I've got. My watch is going out. Okay. Anyway, okay. So they couldn't talk to each other. Research looking at OCD has found that sufferers have released increased metabolic activity in the caudate nucleus, the left orbital gyrus, and the left anterior cingulate cortex, and bilateral orbitofrontal cortex. The caudate nucleus, this is really kind of interesting. It's that area of the brain that they think has something to do with ADHD. Increased serotonin levels decrease OCD symptoms, especially the tricyclic clomipramine. Tourettes syndrome is a tic disorder. These individuals seem to be unable to stop themselves from motor tics, so it's the same movement over and over again. A lot of times it's a facial tic. Vocal tics, where they do something with their on a continuous basis, or compulsive actions that they just can't stop. My wife used to work with a guy, her boss was an individual, and when he got embarrassed, what he would do, he would hike up his pants with his forearms like this, and he would snort, and so this is what he would, if you were at a meeting and he was talking to a group of individuals, he's constantly pulling his pants up with his forearms, which was just the most bizarre thing in the world. I mean, if he had grabbed his belt and pulled it up, that would be one thing. But here, he's trying to pull his pants up with his forearms, and it was one of these movements. It was just bizarre.
Something a kid would do.
Yeah, something a kid would do, which is potentially what he did. Now, the strange thing was, he was a veterinarian. That was his job. He was a vet. So when he was working on animals, he didn't have any of these tics. It's when he was working with humans that he had his tics. It was funny because, you know, you'd be talking to him. He didn't like talking to me because he thought I had more education. I did have more education than he did. But I had all this information, and he thought that he had no information whatsoever. So he didn't like to talk to me. So anytime he talked to me, I mean, it was constant. It was constantly, he was pulling his pants up and snorting. It was just too bizarre. But we took our dog over there one time, and of course he's, you know, I come to the door and he's pulling his pants up, but we took our dog over there because we had a new dog. It was an American pointer, and we had found him, and his leg was all messed up, so he had to look him over. And while he was looking him over and talking about the dog, he had no tic whatsoever. But as soon as it was all over with, as soon as we put the dog in the car, you know, he's back to pulling his pants up again. It was just so bizarre. The average age of onset for Tourette's syndrome is 6 to 7. These children also have problems with ADHD, and a lot of them are OCD at the same time. So the problem is you can't tell the difference between what's tic, what is part of their Tourette's syndrome, and what's part of their OCD. That's the problem. OCD is tough because there's something going on in their brain that tells them that they have to do the same thing over and over and over again. Well, Tourette's syndrome is kind of the same way. They have to do the same thing over and over again. They have to do something perfectly over a relatively long period of time.
I have an aunt that does that. She does that well.
Do you notice that when you're around your aunt, all of a sudden you're doing the same thing? Yeah.
I wanted like cough with her, you know, she was like.
I had a friend up north that was Nez Perce, and he did one of those. He had one of those things, and I would do it too when I was around him. I used to play ball with this guy, you know, and we'd sit in the dugout. That was one of the, I can't remember what he was doing.
My grandma had like, when we were small, she used to like chew on something. I was wondering what she was chewing on. I was like looking at her, and people always like noticed that about her. She had this, I don't know what she was. Sometimes I would think it would be like gum, like tree sap or something. She was herbalist. I was wondering what she was chewing on. What was she gnawing on? It was always like. I kept looking throughout her whole life. It was always like that, and I've always questioned my aunts, and they say the same thing. We don't know. We try to figure out what she's. We talk to her. There's nothing. I think that was one of the tics she had. But when she's talking to you, it's just normal. When she's quiet, when she's off on somewhere, you can just hear it. It's around the house.
I had a sister that used to suck on her tongue. And so when she was trying to think of something to say, she'd suck on her thumb. Or when she was reading a book, she'd suck on her tongue. And my mother would she'd see her doing it, and she would say, you know, stop sucking your tongue, which sounds bizarre. I mean, your tongue's in your mouth anyway. But, you know, her cheeks would sink. It was one of those kind of deals. It was really kind of weird. It's not like she was sucking her thumb or chewing her fingernails or whatever. She was sucking her tongue. There was a single gene that may cause the problem. Concordance rates of monozygotic twins is 53 to 77%. Indications are that dopamine receptors, the D2 receptors, the ones that are the problem with schizophrenia, are more sensitive in these individuals, causing involuntary movements, and that's why they do that. It will build up in them, Tourette's syndrome, and of course we make jokes about people with Tourette's syndrome swearing all the time. These things will build up in them, and they have to let it out, and sometimes it's a verbal tic, where they have to, you know, scream motherfucker or something, you know, it's just bizarre. And this is just something that builds up. Some of these individuals are very religious and they have to swear in church. It just gets really strange sometimes, you know, screaming, whatever. Okay, let me see if this will work. This is mad cow's disease. We're going to talk about mad cow's disease. Mad cow's disease is caused by, there it goes, it's going to go. Okay, we're good. I'll show you what mad cow's disease looks like.
Mad cow disease, what is it? Scientifically named bovine spongiform encephalopathy, it is a progressive neurological disease that affects the cow's nervous system. Once infected, the cow's behavior becomes erratic. Inability to walk, uncontrolled movements, and lower milk production. Incubation period can be months, even years. There's no known treatment and the disease is fatal. How do cows get infected? A cow gets infected with the disease if they eat diseased feed, which has abnormal proteins called prions, found in brains, spinal cords, and other parts. These prions cause the degeneration in the brain, giving it a spongy-like appearance. How can it affect us? Humans don't get mad cow disease as such, but they get a variant of it if they eat the diseased cattle tissue. Health officials in the U.S. and elsewhere control such scenarios by periodic sampling and prohibiting cattle parts in feed which may contain prions. Where has it been reported so far? Although the United Kingdom has been most impacted by the mad cow disease so far, the BSE has been reported in many countries around the world. Millions of cattle have been slaughtered, and nearly 200,000 cows have died. Around 200 humans have lost their lives. In the U.S. recently, a cow tested positive for the disease, but the health officials say that the infected cow wasn't designated for meat consumption, and it was an atypical strain of the disease.
Okay. Cows ask man to rescue their newborn calf. Okay, well, we won't do that. All right. Okay, that's mad cow's disease. Bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Humans get a disease very similar to that called Jacobs-Creutzfeldt disease. And it's kind of the same thing. The problem is if you eat brains or spinal cords, it's in the central nervous system of the cow, and that's one of the reasons why they don't sell brains anymore. I can remember cow's brains. I can remember when I was young that you could go to the butcher's shop and there would be cow's brains sitting there. So where did it come from? Hi, Joe. So where did it come from? Well, one of the problems is that these cows will be infected with BSE, with bovine spongiform encephalopathy, and then they'll slaughter them. They will process the meat, which is okay. The meat is fine, but you can't have anything to do with the central nervous system. So if you eat the brains or if you eat the spinal cord, now we got a problem. The problem used to be that, of course, when you butcher a cow, you eat all the meat, you eat all the muscles, and then you take everything else and you make it into sausage. So they were taking brains and they were taking spinal cords and they were taking whatever they could chop up and they were making them into sausages. Well, this is very common in Europe, especially common in England. The other problem they had in England is that they were taking all the leftover parts of the cow and they were chopping them up, they were emulsifying them, and they were putting them in cattle food. So they were spreading BSE all over England. Real serious problem. Now that's fine, but one of the problems that Canadians have is Canadians will do anything that the Brits do. So the Brits were actually selling this tainted feed to the Canadians, and the Canadians were feeding it to their cows. And now it's in Canada. So living up in Montana, where cattle is one of the major aspects, one of the problems we had up there was the cows would wander back and forth across the border. And of course, if it was a Canadian cow, you couldn't butcher it in the United States because it might potentially have BSE. Well, this happened a couple times. Or somebody bought cattle from Canada. I don't know, maybe they were rustling the Canadian cattle. Who knows what they were doing. Anyway, they found a couple of cows with suffering from BSE. So they had to slaughter the whole herd. And when we're talking about herds in Montana, we're talking about 20, 40,000 head of cows. Yeah. What do you do with 40,000 dead cows? What do you do with them? What do you do with one dead cow? Exactly. Yeah, you just drag it off into no man's land. Don't let the coyotes take care of it. That's what you do with a cow if you've got one. But what do you do with if you've got 40,000 of them? What do you do? You bury them, of course. You dig a really, really big pit or a really, really long pit, and you just pile them in. Now the other problem they had was killing them, because it's not that easy to kill a cow. Well, it's not that hard to kill a cow, but it's not that easy to kill a cow. But killing 40,000 was a bit of a mess. Anyway, okay, so the problem is that instead of protein, they have what they call prions. And the prions, of course, if a prion is next to a protein, then it will infect that protein, and it will turn it into a prion. I know, sounds horrible, doesn't it? And that's why, your brain is made up out of protein. So since the prions are taking the place of all these proteins, all of a sudden you've got these holes in the person's brain, or the cow's brain. And that's why they call it spongiform encephalopathy. Anyway, there we go. Wait a minute. And that is mad cow's disease. Okay, so instead of you guys having to take the Chapter 16 quiz, I'm going to give it to you right now. And here are the rules. One of you will be in charge of the question. So, Francis, you get question number 1. You're in charge. But you and Hope can talk about what the answer is. Okay. And so you need to agree on what the answer is. Okay? So it's between the two of you.
How many questions?
20. Yeah. Epidemiological, and you can look it up in your book if you want, or you can look it up in your notes. Epidemiological studies reveal that the incidence of schizophrenia among the world's population is blank, and this disease appears to have been present since the blank. Number 1, or A, 2 to 4%, the Middle Ages. B, 1 to 2%, the beginning of recorded history. C, 0.5 to 1%, the Industrial Revolution. D, 4 to 6%, beginning of the 20th century. You're in charge. Epidemiological studies
reveal that the incidence of schizophrenia among the world's population is, and the disease appears to have been present since.
How long has it been around?
See, so if the world's population boosted in the Industrial Revolution, and the disease appears to have present since.
I'll ask Joe, he knows the answer.
So are you saying that C?
Could it be C?
C population is.
When did we first discover, how long has schizophrenia been around is the question.
That's a long,
Well, it's been around, but it wasn't really diagnosed, or it wasn't really.
Well, yeah, but how long has it been around?
The beginning of
20th century. Well, I would say beginning.
So are you guys agreeing on an answer?
I would say D.
D? Beginning of the 20th century?
I would say C. Because it's the time when everybody was kind of like grouping up Industrial Revolution.
So what's your answer?
C.
C.
B? That's the correct answer.
C.
B is the correct answer?
B is the correct answer.
An example of a positive symptom would be blank. An example of a negative symptoms would be a positive symptom would be
Okay. An example of a positive system would be what? And an example of a negative system would be what?
okay. I heard A back here. It makes sense. Hallucinations.
No, that's bad.
And then an example of negative would be delusions. Because delusions like
Don't
delusion
listen to Joe.
seems negative because it kind of like messes with your whole.
Don't start reading things into things. What's the difference between a positive symptom and a negative symptom?
Positive is something good, something would
Look at your
be
notes.
motor excitement and hallucinations.
Look at your notes. You got it right there in your notes. Schizophrenia. It's in the beginning of the chapter.
Yeah, I see that.
A, hallucination, delusions. B, motor excitement, hallucinations. C, hallucinations, emotional and social withdrawal. D, blunted effects. C, motor excitement. A.
C. Right? Would you go with C?
Hallucination, emotional, social.
Because the negative symptoms would be like emotional and social withdrawal.
Mhm.
That's like the negative part of
C is correct.
C. Oh.
C.
A?
No. Positive symptoms are something that's added to you, hallucinations. A negative symptom is something that's taken away, like your emotions. So, there you go.
Also delusion.
MRI
Is
As far as
studies
schizophrenia,
of identical twins who
That
are
is great.
discordant for schizophrenia, i.e. only one twin has the disease, have revealed that the affected twin often exhibits an enlarged
A, amygdala. B, hippocampus. C, limbic system. D, lateral ventricles.
who's hippocampus.
B.
So they have an enlarged memory.
Oh, no, no.
Amygdala is the small part right in here.
Amygdala has to do with the emotion.
would be A.
Should we pair with A?
See here.
And then the limbic system is dealing with.
There's a picture of what the answer is.
Picture.
Yes.
Okay. I see.
You should have Jeopardy, like a psychology night.
Yeah,
Jeopardy.
Psychology Jeopardy.
Oh.
Well, it kind of is.
That'd be really cool to see how much we know.
Good luck.
All the psychology classes.
B number C.
Yeah.
What is validity?
Let's say the C.
I couldn't answer that.
The limbic system?
C.
There's a picture.
This one here.
That's a picture.
Mm-hmm.
What is that a picture of?
It has identical twins and the MRI, 26-year-old. Enlarged brain and verticals. Verticals in the brain with the schizophrenia compared to its growth.
Okay, so what's the answer?
So it would be A.
Is that a picture of the amygdala?
Oh no.
It's the ventricle.
Oh, okay, D. Would be a.
D is the correct
D,
answer, the
yeah.
lateral ventricles. Number 4, in people with schizophrenia, cellular abnormalities are evident in several limbic system structures, including the amygdala, the hippocampus, and the parahippocampal gyrus. In these regions, blank, or what's the answer? A, the pyramidal cells appear disorganized. B, the pyramidal cells are stacked in columns. C, the lateral ventricles are reduced. D, a reduced corpus callosum. So we're talking about the limbic system.
Hey, Bruce?
Yeah.
In your psychology and law, what's your finals is the paper, right?
Yeah.
I'm Sarah.
Oh, you have Sarah?
I did that Curé something brief.
Somebody sent me a paper that they tried, amicus brief, you have to
Yeah.
write an amicus brief, yeah.
With this question, would you think it will be C, the reduce?
Kind of struggling with it a little bit.
Okay, but,
So was the person that sent
lateral
me their paper.
ventricular system or reduced?
I couldn't even find a court case or anything to look at.
And this
Thinking it.
MRI?
So I just went to my case study that I did. Where it's
Good luck.
Mine has the reduced part of it.
Actually, there's a picture of this one as well.
Is this number, this C?
See, the lateral ventricles are reduced? That would mean that remember you just said that the lateral ventricles are increased.
Okay, so it would show the space with this one, right?
No, that was the last one. But there is a picture, I gave you a picture of this.
About the mouse?
Hey, Bruce. What is the most boring psychology career?
Psychology and law. Just kidding. I don't like law.
I'd say it's research. It's the most-
No, it's not.
Yes,
It's
it is.
exciting when you find
Well,
your-
research is exciting, but learning about how to
It's
do
A,
it.
because
When it accepts
all
your
the
hypothesis,
pyramidal
it's fun.
cells
Well,
appear
it rejects
disorganized.
it.
Yeah,
That's,
it's bad.
It's A, Bruce.
Is it A?
A is correct.
Yep. But over here, like,
Amphetamine abusers may take much larger doses. The use of higher doses may produce. The use of higher doses may produce.
See. See.
Now, if you overdose it, you're just gonna you're gonna cause psychosis. What do you think? If you take too much caffeine,
Oh,
you get all
A is
jittery.
correct.
Yeah.
But also D, you could say D is correct because it does cause bizarre movements. What they call crack dancing.
did you guys do the mouse thing? That mouse house, or whatever?
No.
That, not mouse house, the drug addict mouse thing.
Isn't that fun?
I really like that.
Chlorpromazine.
Chlorpromazine.
Chlorpromazine belongs to the class of antipsychotic drugs known as blank. Antipsychotics in general are known as
Neuroleptics.
Neuroleptics.
Chlorpromazine belongs to the class of antipsychotics. It's in your notes. Oh, it's almost time to quit.
Oh, man.
I don't have time. The answer is
C.
phenothiazines. Phenothiazines. Number 7. Patients with Parkinson's disease given L-dopa secrete increased amounts of dopamine and may experience psychotic side effects. So it's D. Conversely, when people with schizophrenia are treated with dopamine antagonists, they may develop symptoms resembling Parkinson's disease, as bizarre as that is. Number 8, the long-term motor problem associated with the use of many antipsychotic drugs is called tardive dyskinesia, A. Number 9, unipolar major depression occurs most frequently in people blank, is most common in and tends to last for months. The answer is people over 40 and women suffer from it more than anybody else. In the 1930s, electroconvulsive shock therapy, in which electrodes deliver electricity through the skull to the brain, has been used unsuccessfully to treat schizophrenia and successfully to treat severe depression. Number 11, people who attempt suicide tend to have low levels of serotonin or its metabolites in their CSF. One important biological effect of light is that it suppresses the hormone, what are we talking about? Oh, light, melatonin.
Yeah.
Melatonin. In seasonal affective disorder, people tend to be depressed in the winter months. So it happens up in Canada and in Montana and Minnesota. Bipolar illness is treated with the metal lithium carbonate. Anti-anxiety medications are known by the general name anxiolytics. Nowadays, the most prevalent class of anti-anxiety drug consists of benzodiazepines like diazepam or Valium. The benzodiazepines interact with receptors for the transmitter blank, potentiating the ability of this transmitter, where was I? The transmitter to produce an inhibitory postsynaptic signal through the modulation of chloride conductance. These receptors are distributed widely throughout the brain. They are especially dense in the cortex, hippocampus, and the blank, which is especially implicated in fear. Obviously, it's GABA and amygdala because amygdala has to do with fear. In PTSD, high circulating levels of blank may lead to the cell loss in the blank and may contribute to memory abnormalities. We just talked about this. Yeah, so it's D, cortisol and hippocampus. 18 and blank. A and blank is an act that the individual performs over and over without reason or ability to stop, such as excessive hand washing, yada yada yada. So, yeah, it's compulsions and obsessions or thoughts, compulsions or acts. Number 19, blank is particularly effective in treating OCD. An important aspect of this action is its ability to block the reuptake of serotonin. Lexapro is actually what we treat OCD with.
Would you give that to our corners?
Yeah, Lexapro. Write that down.
I know.
The causative agent in mad cow disease is an accumulation of abnormally folded proteins called. Humans contract the disease called blank, Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, prions and Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. I get them backwards all the time. Anyway, so you guys got an A. Congratulations, you got them all right. I know. If we had more time, I'd have given you.
Infuse like
I can
knowledge
do it for our
for
class,
about
Bruce.
2 minutes.
Why don't I do it for your class?
Yeah.
When I was in your class, I can do that.
For real?
You weren't in this class. You didn't take. Did you take this for me?
What's that?
Yeah, you did, but you never showed up to class. It was down in 300. Yeah, 300. It was in the ITV room.
I always do it.
Oh, jeez.
I was the only one that did.
You were the only one that showed up for class.
If
Okay.
you don't believe me, I'll go back to those videos.
Yeah. Okay.
So is that why when we were doing our counseling session in this class, or not this one, the other next one, that we're supposed to combine what we learned, like from this one?
Sure. You're supposed to take all the knowledge that you have and be able
Is that
to.
why you always ask if they have a physical done or an exam? Like blood work?
Yeah, that and
You missed an A.
yeah. Sometimes there's a medical reason for their problem.
Yeah.
A.
Yeah.
Oh, serious? That's good.
And we're kind of supposed to know that, the whole medical background of each.
Well, you can read it. It's usually in the form. Sometimes that can affect what's going on. So yeah.
But even some might